1990. The House of Commons is silent. Then, 3 words. Firm, fierce, final. No, no, no. Margaret Thatcher's voice cuts through history. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a declaration of war against the dream of a united Europe, and it cost her everything. In late 1990, Europe stood on the brink of transformation. A single currency, a political union. Germany had just reunified. France and Brussels pushed for deeper integration, but not everyone agreed. In London, a storm was brewing. Margaret Thatcher believed in Britain, not Europe. She saw Britain as sovereign, independent, unbowed. While others praised unity, she feared a trap. To her, Europe meant rules without votes, control without consent. October 30th, 1990. Thatcher walks into the Commons. Her notes are short. Her tone, unshakable. She declares her refusal to surrender British powers. Then, no, no, no. The room shifts. The silence breaks. Within 24 hours, her deputy prime minister resigns. Geoffrey Howe, long frustrated, has had enough. He walks away in silence, but his resignation speech will roar louder than expected. It triggers a challenge. A political earthquake begins. Ironically, Thatcher once supported Europe. In 1975, she campaigned to stay in the European Economic Community, but that was a trade bloc, not a superstate. What changed wasn't just Europe, it was what Europe wanted to become. Many Britons felt caught between pride and progress. Some feared isolation, others feared absorption. Thatcher's words, though clear, left the country uneasy. Were they protecting sovereignty or refusing to adapt? It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Her voice, measured. Her face, unyielding. The Commons chamber became her stage. For one final act, she performed with everything she had. She turned her fire on Labour. "Would you hand over the pound so easily?" She mocked their silence, their shifting stance on Europe. "Me too," she jeered. Her words sliced through their hesitation. She warned of Brussels gaining power, of unelected bureaucrats deciding Britain's fate. She refused to let a foreign commission overrule the will of Parliament. For her, this wasn't just policy, it was principle. Just days earlier, EU Commission President Jacques Delors had made a bold proposal. He wanted a European Parliament, a Central Commission, and a Council like a Senate. To Thatcher, it sounded like a coup. She answered in Parliament with fire. No, no, no. Behind closed doors, her ministers were uneasy. Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd shifted uncomfortably. Chancellor John Major was silent. The Iron Lady stood alone. And the iron, it was starting to rust. Geoffrey Howe's resignation wasn't just a quiet departure. It was a precision strike. He accused Thatcher of undermining the UK's European credibility. His words were calm, but they cut like a knife. Soon after, backbencher Michael Heseltine made his move. He challenged Thatcher for party leadership. It was the moment her enemies had waited for, and her allies feared most. The Conservative Party split along a hidden fault line. Some believed in European unity, others clung to British pride. And Thatcher's stance made both sides uncomfortable, too bold for compromise, too proud to retreat. In the Commons' back rows, Whispers turned to planning. Could she survive another vote? Was loyalty worth losing the next election? The Iron Lady had always commanded respect. Now, even that was fading. That was... Across Europe, leaders held their breath. They knew if Thatcher fell, Britain might shift course. But if she survived, Brussels would face its most relentless opponent yet. On the streets of London, opinions clashed. To some, Thatcher was a protector. To others, a threat to progress. The pub debates were fierce, the cab radios louder than ever. Once Thatcher had stood shoulder to shoulder with Europe. Now she stood in defiance. Her vision of cooperation had turned into a warning. Sovereignty, once lost, is never easily reclaimed. She faced the Commons with steel in her eyes. No apology, no backtracking, just her belief that Britain must never be ruled from Brussels, even if it cost her everything. It already had. The Conservative Party held its breath. A leadership ballot was cast. Thatcher won, but not by enough. It wasn't defeat on paper, but in politics, margins matter. She was wounded, and the vultures were circling. That night, Number 10 was quiet. The corridors, once buzzing with power, fell still. Thatcher paced, alone with the weight of her decisions, and the realization the fight might be over. The next morning, one by one, her ministers arrived, not to support her, but to tell her it's time to go. The Iron Lady had led them, but she no longer commanded them. On November 28, 1990, Margaret Thatcher resigned. Her voice trembled for the first time. She thanked the nation and stepped away from the podium, still standing tall. But history had already begun writing its final chapter. As she left Downing Street, she shook hands with staff. She waved to cameras. But inside, she knew. She had stood for sovereignty and lost to politics. John Major stepped into power. Quieter, less confrontational. He promised to heal divisions. But Europe would haunt him. Because the ghosts of Thatcher's words still lingered in every treaty, every debate. Even out of office, Thatcher's presence loomed. She wrote, she spoke, and she warned. The EU, she said, was not a partnership. It was becoming an empire. And empires don't ask, they take. As years passed, her once radical view became mainstream. New MPs quoted her. Tabloids praised her warnings. A movement was forming. Its name? Euroscepticism. And its heartbeat? No, no, no. In 2016, Britain held a vote. Stay or leave the European Union. Thatcher had died 3 years earlier, but her fingerprints were everywhere. Brexit was her echo. Heard 26 years too late. 3 words reshaped a continent. They ended a career. They fractured a party, and they inspired a generation. No, no, no. A rejection, a warning, and perhaps a prophecy. Long after she left, Thatcher's ghost lingered in Parliament. Each time the EU was debated, her shadow returned. No treaty, no currency, no speech escaped her legacy. Even her silence became a statement. She never used the word Brexit, but she saw it coming. A slow unraveling of trust between Britain and Brussels, between people and politics, between promises and power. Where others dreamed of a European future, Thatcher saw a British past. Empire, sovereignty, control. To her, integration felt like surrender. She didn't hate Europe. She just didn't want to be ruled by it. Sometimes history is made not by what we accept, but by what we reject. Thatcher's no wasn't just defiance. It was a line in the sand, a warning to every future prime minister. Power is easier to lose than regain. Easier. She didn't fear Europe's people. She feared its structure, committees, commissions, bureaucrats no one voted for. Power behind closed doors. That, she said, is how freedom fades. Over time, Thatcher became less of a person and more of an idea. For some, she was a hero. For others, a villain. But everyone agreed. She changed the course of Britain's place in the world. Even her admirers asked, did she push too hard? Was her defiance brilliance or blind stubbornness? History rarely gives clear answers, but it never forgets who dared to ask the question. Modern politicians study her speeches like scripture, her confidence, her control, but few have her conviction. Even fewer are willing to lose everything for it. In 2013, the House of Commons held a tribute. MPs stood to honor her life. Yet even then, some disagreed. That's the mark of a true leader. She made everyone choose a side. 3 words, 3 rejections, 3 thunderclaps that still echo across Europe. They weren't just defiance. They were a vision, one that never truly died, just waited to rise again. After Thatcher, political language changed. No became a rallying cry, not compromise, not consensus, but resistance. Europe was no longer a goal. It was a threat, a question of loyalty, a test of patriotism. Years later, her words echoed in unlikely voices. Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, politicians who never served with her, but spoke as if they had. She had become more than a memory. She was a movement. She was a statues were raised, documentaries filmed, critics fumed, supporters wept. Whether loved or loathed, Margaret Thatcher had become something rare, an icon whose name outlived her era. She warned of losing the pound. In 1999, the euro was born, but Britain kept its currency, not because of policy, but because of pride. Her pride. Maastricht, Lisbon, every new EU treaty faced the same ghost. Thatcher wasn't there, but her no hovered over every clause, every opt-out, every veto. From tabloids to talk shows, Britain's doubt deepened. What once was skepticism became belief. Europe wasn't a union, it was a trap. And Thatcher had warned them first. She didn't live to see Brexit, but she fathered the idea, the anger, the resistance, the longing for control. Britain didn't break free in 2016. It began breaking in 1990. Her voice left Parliament and entered culture, songs, sketches, films. She became a symbol, a punchline, a prophecy. Few politicians reach that level. Even fewer survive it. Foreign leaders studied her. Some feared her. Reagan respected her. Mitterrand resented her. Her no was not just to Europe. It was to weakness. And the world noticed. If she stood here today, would she say it again? No, no, no. To treaties, to technocrats, to surrender? Maybe. But one thing is certain. She'd never whisper. In 1990, Thatcher stood against a tide of global change. While others chased unity, she clung to sovereignty. She wasn't trying to be liked. She was trying to be right. History would decide whether she was For Thatcher, sovereignty wasn't symbolic. It was sacred. Every vote mattered. Every law meant ownership. To her, handing power to Europe wasn't partnership. It was betrayal. European leaders viewed her as stubborn. French newspapers called her Madame Non. Brussels insiders rolled their eyes. But quietly, some admired her clarity. She said what many only whispered. She warned, "Give Brussels power, and you lose control. Give up your currency, and you lose identity." Most of Europe didn't listen. But Britain remembered. Thatcher held up a mirror to Europe. It didn't like what it saw. A continent drifting from its people. Power centralized. Voices lost. She never wanted out. She just wanted in. On her terms. She won the argument, but lost the war. Her cabinet broke. Her party cracked. She was right about Europe. But politics punishes those who say it first. Some leaders bend to the moment. Thatcher refused, even when surrounded, even when isolated, even when it meant stepping down. That was her strength and her downfall. Central banks without borders, laws passed by unknown faces, flags flying where votes don't count. This, she feared, would be Europe's future. And slowly, it was. Her speech plays in classrooms, in Brexit debates, in political podcasts. Every generation rediscovers it and asks the same question. Was she warning us or challenging us? Because leadership is easy when you're loved. But real leaders stand firm when they're alone. She didn't say yes to be agreeable. She said no to be remembered. And we still do. In America, she was a heroine. To Reagan, she was the best man in England. Conservatives across the world studied her speeches. They quoted her lines, but none could copy her conviction. Thatcherism became a brand. Deregulation, hardline nationalism, privatization. But stripped from her personal discipline, it became louder, messier, and often less principled. Brexiteers praised her. Globalists debated her. Even labor leaders invoked her strength. Everyone wanted a piece of the Iron Lady, even those she would have opposed. In 3 words, she drew a line, not just across the commons, but across time. To cross it meant something. Even now it still does. She wasn't a populist, but many borrowed her fire. From Trump to Le Pen, her bluntness became a blueprint. But her strategy was reasoned. Theirs, often reactionary. She inspired novels, films, villains and heroes. Meryl Streep played her. Cartoonists mocked her. But none captured her entirely, because she was always more than the script allowed. Not her hairstyle, not her voice, but her willingness to lose, to risk it all for something she believed. That's why we still speak her name. In the decades since her speech, Britain chose. Not always clearly, not always proudly, but each time the EU came up, her voice returned, whispering, "Don't forget me." Her message wasn't about Brussels. It was about control, self-rule, national choice. In a world growing more centralized, she stood for the nation as a home, not just a unit in a system. She didn't get the last word in politics, but she might have gotten the first word in something bigger. A reckoning, a revival, a rupture. And in it all, her no remains unforgettable. Margaret Thatcher shouted, but history doesn't always answer. It listens, then waits, until one day her words return, not in books, but in ballots, borders, and the silence that follows decisions. She never said sorry. Not for the mines, not for the unions, and certainly not for Europe. Because to her, leadership meant choosing, even when the world didn't understand why. Her speech wasn't a soundbite. It was a philosophy, a belief that power belongs closest to the people, that identity isn't outdated, it's essential. In classrooms, her legacy sparks debate. Was she right? Was she reckless? Was she alone? They don't always agree, but they never forget her. Britain is no longer the empire she remembered, nor the union she feared. It's still deciding what kind of nation it wants to be, but in the tension, she's still there. She broke through as the first. She stood firm as the last. And in between, she changed everything. Not just policy, but tone and legacy. The world was moving toward unity. Most said yes. Yes to Europe. Yes to global systems. She said no. Alone. And maybe that's why she was remembered. Iron bends under heat. It creaks, but it doesn't shatter. Her stance on Europe outlasted treaties, outlasted leaders, outlasted even herself. That's the weight of conviction. If she stood here now, would she change her mind? Would she soften? Would she say maybe? No. She would say it exactly the same. No, no, no. It was never just about Europe. It was about who speaks for Britain, who chooses, who holds the pen that signs the laws, and sometimes, to write history, you begin with a refusal.